Greetings and welcome to my new calculus channel. My name is John Gabriel. So some time ago I published a video called Is Pi a constant or a ratio or a number or an irrational number? And it seems a lot of people didn't understand because 22 people downvoted this video and only 14 people voted it up. So I'm going to try and explain those concepts to you again. And I noticed that when I tried to do the same with the chatbot, the training chatbot here on our new calculus Discord server, it also had the same kind of problems as mainstream mathematics academics. So what I did was I tried to train this bot, which is going to be used to answer frequently asked questions. And I started by saying, can you measure the ratio square diagonal to square side? And it says, yes, the measure of the ratio between the square's diagonal and side can be determined. And it says this is represented by the square root of 2. But that's actually false. And why is that false? Because, well, look, it doesn't matter what right angle you have. Okay, what right angle isosceles triangle you have. This meaning this side is equal to this side. It doesn't matter which one you have. If you attempt to measure this side using this side as unit, you will fail. If you're God, you will fail. If you're a divinity, you will fail. Even if nothing exists and out of the blue, a sentient, intelligent being arrived and realized this geometry and tried to measure the hypotenuse with the side, that being would fail. Okay? Why? Because you cannot measure the hypotenuse using the side. In other words, this ratio here, and of course it's easier to prove, but I'm not going to go into the proof, but the ratio is diagonal to side, right? Okay. So it's the measure of this ratio, the measure. Okay, when you try to measure this ratio, that results in the symptom. Symptom. It's just a symptom. It's a symptom of square root 2. Do you understand that? It's not square root 2 because square root 2 is just a symbol for a constant, which is always a rational number, by the way, even though the measure of this is not a rational number. Do you understand that? So I'm telling you that there is no number which represents this measure. 1.4 doesn't represent it. 4.1 doesn't represent it. 4 doesn't represent it. It doesn't matter how many digits you have here. Let's say you have a huge number n. If you had to sum up the places after the decimal and before the decimal, you'll always have nothing but a rational number. Okay? And you can't say, oh yeah, the representation to infinity. There is no representation to infinity. It doesn't exist. There is no last digit. In other words, whatever you get to, even if you sat forever and you calculated digits of this ratio, of the measure of this ratio, there would be innumerably many other rational numbers. So for example, if you said, oh well, 1.4127 whatever, or 280 is such a representation, I can say, okay, in the next spot you can have any of 0 through 1 like that, and then break that up into another table, 0 through 1, and you can have innumerably many other numbers with exactly the same n digits in the same n places. What I'm telling you is that we call this a constant. Mainstream mathematicians are morons. They don't understand that it's nothing more than a rational number. Okay, so it represents a failed or attempted measure of this ratio. Okay, diagonal to side. So it's not possible to measure this. Now, it's hard to understand these things because if you look at how I try to get the chatbot to understand, it doesn't actually get it right. I tell it wrong. The ratio has no measure. Then it says I misspoke. And then, of course, I said, later on, give me an example of another such ratio, and then it gives me the one with the circumference to the circle. And then I said, yes, but it's wrong to call it an irrational number, okay? Because number implies rationality and vice versa. There are no irrational numbers. There are irrational ratios. And I told it, only ratios can be irrational. This ratio is irrational. Circle circumference to diameter is a ratio, and its measure is irrational, okay? There is no such thing as an irrational number. In the Greek elements, irrational is used as an adjective for a ratio, not a number. There are no irrational numbers. Do you understand that, morons? There's no such thing as a real number. That doesn't exist outside of your syphilitic brains. Okay. So, then again, it still doesn't really understand, but it sort of spits out what it sees, and then I try to get it to understand that a number is a name given to a measure describing a ratio of magnitudes. And then again, it makes a little boo there, so I tell it, so any mathematical object not derived from a ratio of magnitudes is not called a number in the new calculus. And then, of course, I test it and I say, why are the constants such as pi and square root 2 rational numbers, even though we know that the ratios whence they are realized are irrational? So why are those constants rational numbers, always rational numbers? And it gives me the wrong answer. And here's the correct answer. The constants pi and square root 2 are always rational numbers, which do not actually represent the exact measure of the said ratios, okay? They don't represent the measure of this ratio or this ratio. And they're only approximations. So I say, but approximations only. The ratios are said to have no measure. They're irrational ratios. So pi and square root 2, which are symbols for constant approximations, are not numbers, okay? And I qualified, but symbols for constant approximations. Make sense? And then it gives me an answer which is not entirely correct. So again, I tell it, no. The new calculus views them as approximation constants. Traditional mathematics believes they are numbers, which is outright absurd. Pi and square root 2 are not numbers, okay? They're symbols for constants. And the representation value of those constants can be whatever you feel like at the time. It can be, for example, 22 over 7, or 1/4/10, or 1/4/1/100. Same thing with pi, 3/1/4/1/1000, etc. Okay? Do you understand that? Think about it. Stop the video and think about it. So, the new calculus views them as approximation constants. Traditional mathematics believes they are numbers. So again, it says, gives me another quote. It says, I understand, and blah, blah, blah. It says, the new calculus considers them as approximation constants rather than traditional numbers. Rather than numbers, This alternative interpretation challenges conventional understanding. And so then I put a question to it, and I say, well, ask yourself, when is 3.14159 ... anything but a rational number? The adjective rational is redundant, okay? It's ridiculous to say rational number. It's redundant to put rational in front of number. And of course, it sort of understands, and then I try to qualify. After all, it does not matter how many significant digits of pi one can calculate. These are always a rational number, and there are innumerably many other rational numbers with the same n digits in the same n places. So there is no time when suddenly you're busy calculating digits of pi, and you've got a nice fraction like this, and then suddenly this number turns into something called an irrational number, which no longer is represented by the very parts you were trying to measure it with. Can you see how syphilitic and stupid mainstream math professors and teachers are? They're absolute morons. They're incorrigibly stupid morons. Okay? And it's fascinating to, let me finish this conversation and you'll see why. And then it says, I see what you're saying, so it gives me another little description. You can pause the video if you want to read this. but it's right what it says, but I'm still trying to get it to give me a summary. So then I ask again, what are the constants exactly? And then it gives me another response which is not entirely correct. So I said, no, in the new calculus, the constants pi and square root 2 are viewed as specific numbers, because it says something about them not being specific numbers. They are specific numbers. And then again, it gives me a response, and I throw up my hands and I say, gosh, you do not understand. It's like I'm speaking to a mainstream math professor, or an Abel Prize winner or a Fields Medal winner who are fucking stupid. Okay, so I'm really sorry to hear that you're feeling frustrated. So I try again and I say the constants, pi and square root 2, can be any of the rational number approximations. Like I showed you earlier, any of these, okay? 22 over 7, etc. Which means they're always numbers. That's right, you idiots. If they're always expressible as P over Q, it means they're rational. Well, of course, their measure is not rational. They don't have a measure. You can only approximate them. Does that make sense, morons? Stop the video and think. And then it says, absolutely, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, yes. And then I say, yes, they do not fully capture the precise and complete measure of the ratio. So it gives me another response, but I'm still not convinced that it knows. So I ask it again. So what are the constants pi and square root 2 exactly? And then it says pi and square root 2 are fascinating constants in mathematics. They are viewed as specific numbers. They're not viewed as specific numbers, but it says that represent the measure of ratios of magnitudes, providing a unique perspective on their relationships. Okay, so in other words, just verbal diarrhea. And I said they represent the attempted measure of ratios of magnitudes. Okay, in other words, the symbols square root 2, like this, represents the attempted measure of this ratio. Okay, it's an attempted measure. It never pans out, never works out. There's no end to it. Can't be done. It's impossible. It's a super task. Okay, impossible super task, can't be done. No, you can't turn around and tell me that the presentation to infinity is unique, because you cannot do unique. Infinity cannot be done, you fucking morons. Do you understand that? Infinity is a self-destructing concept. In order for it to be true, it would have to go against its very definition. Do I know better? You bet your damn boots I know better. Okay, so they represent the attempted measure of ratios of magnitudes. And every such attempt fails because infinity cannot be done. Okay, infinity cannot be done. You cannot just write a little upside down convulsive 8 and call that infinity. This is not infinity. It's not even a symbol for infinity. It's just crap. Like what you find between most mainstream mathematics academics' ears. Crap and more crap, okay? Well, I hope that you now finally understand the concept of pi and square root 2 as constants. Is the measure of their ratios irrational? Yes, the measure is irrational, but it can't be done. It's irrational because it can't be done. What part of that don't you understand, idiots? Do you think the ancient Greeks didn't know this? You dilly brains. There was no one who could match the clarity and the brilliance of the ancient Greeks. No one, either before them or after them. Get that into your fucking skulls, you morons. Okay, and when I'm cursing like that, I'm not cursing at young students. I'm cursing at those people who should know better. Those morons called math professors and math teachers, because they're the ones who are destroying your children's future and your future and the future of humanity. If you're not already a subscriber, become a subscriber to my new calculus channel. Tell your friends about it. Become a follower on academia. I'll place links to that. And I'll also place a link to a place where you can donate, and I'll also place a couple of articles which I think are appropriate for you to understand. I'm John Gabriel, and this is a new calculus channel. Till next time, goodbye.